Stephen Hawking wasn't just a scientist, he was a phenomenon. Despite being diagnosed with ALS at 21 and given only 2 years to live, he defied all odds, living until the age of 76. Throughout his extraordinary life, Hawking revolutionized our understanding of the universe with his work on black holes and the nature of time itself. What many don't know is that behind the public persona was a man who contemplated some of life's most profound questions. This is the story of a rare, intimate conversation with Hawking that never made it to the mainstream media. A discussion where the world's most famous physicist ventured beyond the realm of science and into the territory of existence, consciousness, and what might await us after death. In his final years, Hawking granted a special interview to discuss topics he rarely addressed publicly. While his scientific views on the afterlife were well documented, he famously compared death to a broken-down computer. This conversation revealed nuances and personal reflections that painted a more complex picture of his thoughts. The conversation we're about to explore wasn't officially censored in the traditional sense. Rather, it was overlooked, perhaps because it didn't fit neatly into the public narrative of Hawking as a strict materialist. These reflections offer a rare glimpse into how even one of history's greatest scientific minds grappled with the ultimate mystery that awaits us all. Join us as we journey through this remarkable conversation and discover how Hawking's brilliant mind approached the enigma of what might lie beyond our physical existence. Cambridge University, 2016. A small room adorned with books and scientific equipment. The mechanical whir of Hawking's wheelchair and voice synthesizer provided the backdrop to what would become one of his most thought-provoking interviews. The interviewer, a longtime colleague who had earned Hawking's trust over decades, came prepared to discuss black hole information paradox. However, as often happens in meaningful conversations, the discussion veered into unexpected territory when Hawking himself steered it toward questions of consciousness and existence. People assume I have a purely mechanistic view of consciousness because of my condition, Hawking's synthesizer voiced with its characteristic cadence. The truth is more complicated. This opening remark set the stage for what would become a fascinating exploration of how a man trapped in an immobile body contemplated the nature of existence. What made this interview particularly special was the absence of time constraints and media pressure. Unlike televised appearances where Hawking needed to compose responses in advance, this private setting allowed for a more spontaneous exchange. His assistant confirmed later that the physicist was particularly energized that day, spending hours crafting responses to questions that clearly resonated with him personally. The interviewer noted that Hawking displayed an unusual emotional openness, as much as could be discerned from his limited facial expressions. When the topic turned to what might exist beyond our physical world, those close to him reported seeing a subtle but distinct change in his demeanor, a spark of curiosity that transcended his scientific skepticism. This was Stephen Hawking unplugged, not the public figure carefully presenting scientific positions, but a human being contemplating the greatest mystery we all face. What followed was a conversation that would challenge many assumptions about how the renowned physicist viewed the ultimate frontier. Few people realized that Stephen Hawking's intellectual curiosity extended far beyond theoretical physics. While widely known for his work on cosmology and quantum gravity, Hawking had a deep interest in philosophy that remained largely unexplored in public discussions. Science is increasingly answering questions that used to be the province of religion, Hawking stated. But there remain deeper questions about why we exist at all that science may never answer. This acknowledgement that science has boundaries revealed a more nuanced thinker than the strict atheist often portrayed in media headlines. Hawking elaborated on how his decades confined to a wheelchair gave him extraordinary time for inner contemplation. When your body becomes largely irrelevant to your daily existence, you develop a different relationship with your consciousness, he explained. You begin to question whether the mind is truly inseparable from the physical brain. The physicist then ventured into territory surprising for someone known for materialist views. He discussed how quantum mechanics, particularly the observer effect and entanglement, raises profound questions about consciousness that extend beyond simple brain chemistry. The universe looks increasingly like a great thought rather than a great machine, he noted, echoing Sir James Jean's famous quote. Hawking described how his immersion in theoretical physics led him to question whether mathematics was discovered or invented, a classic philosophical problem with profound implications for how we understand reality. If mathematical truths exist independently of humans, where do they exist? Perhaps the material world isn't all there is. Most surprisingly, Hawking expressed genuine intellectual humility about the limits of current scientific understanding. We've barely scratched the surface of understanding consciousness. It would be scientifically irresponsible to make definitive claims about its ultimate nature or what happens when we die. This cautious approach revealed a scientist comfortable with uncertainty in areas where definitive evidence remains elusive. In this remarkable conversation, Hawking ventured into one of modern physics' most contentious frontiers, the relationship between quantum mechanics and consciousness. This intersection has fascinated physicists since the early days of quantum theory, when pioneers like Wolfgang Pauli and Erwin Schrödinger speculated about connections between mind and matter. The observer effect in quantum mechanics suggests consciousness may play a fundamental role in determining physical reality, Hawking noted. While I've been skeptical of overreaching interpretations, the question remains fascinating. He explained how the famous double-slit experiment, where particles behave differently when observed, continues to puzzle physicists and philosophers alike. Hawking then addressed the growing field of quantum biology, which examines quantum effects in living systems. We're discovering quantum processes operating in biological systems previously thought too warm and wet for quantum coherence. This raises intriguing questions about consciousness. Recent research has found quantum effects in bird navigation, photosynthesis, and potentially even neural microtubules, structures some theorists link to consciousness. What truly surprised the interviewer was Hawking's willingness to engage with controversial theories like quantum consciousness. While not endorsing specific models like those proposed by Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, Hawking admitted, the integration of quantum theory with neuroscience may eventually provide insights into consciousness that completely transform our understanding of reality. Perhaps most provocatively, Hawking pondered whether consciousness might have quantum properties that don't simply terminate at death. Information is never truly destroyed in the universe according to quantum theory, he said. While I don't subscribe to traditional views of an afterlife, the question of what happens to the information pattern we call consciousness remains open from a strict physics perspective. This wasn't Hawking embracing spirituality, but rather acknowledging the profound mystery consciousness presents to science. The hard problem of consciousness, why we have subjective experience at all, may require conceptual revolutions as significant as those that gave us quantum mechanics and relativity, he concluded, demonstrating an intellectual openness rarely captured in his public statements. This chapter explores the deeply personal experiences that shaped Hawking's private thoughts about mortality and existence. Insights rarely shared in public forums. Living with ALS for over 50 years gives you a unique perspective on the mind-body problem, Hawking reflected. When your body gradually ceases responding while your mind remains sharp, you naturally question their relationship. This profound disconnection between consciousness and physical form led Hawking to contemplate whether consciousness might have properties independent of its physical substrate. The physicist then shared something extraordinary, moments during his illness when his sense of self seemed to transcend his physical limitations. There were times, particularly during intense mathematical thinking, when I experienced what I can only describe as a dissolution of boundaries between myself and the mathematical structures I was contemplating, he revealed. I felt connected to something larger than myself. Hawking clarified he wasn't describing supernatural experiences, but rather moments that challenged his understanding of consciousness. He compared these states to what neuroscientists call flow states, or what contemplative traditions describe as experiences of non-duality, where the subject-object division temporarily dissolves. The conversation took a particularly poignant turn when Hawking discussed his near-death experiences during pneumonia in 1985, when doctors suggested turning off his life support. Coming that close to death changes you, he stated. While I didn't have the classic tunnel of light experience, I developed a certain comfort with the prospect of death that surprised even me. Friends and family noted that after this brush with mortality, Hawking seemed to develop a more nuanced view about the possibility of existence beyond physical life. His ex-wife Jane, who remained close to him, later commented that Stephen occasionally discussed consciousness in ways that seemed to leave room for mystery, a stark contrast to his public statements. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, Hawking concluded, borrowing Haldane's famous quote, "It is stranger than we can imagine." This applies equally to consciousness. In this pivotal chapter, Hawking drew fascinating parallels between his groundbreaking work on black hole information paradox and the nature of human consciousness after death. My research on black holes led to a profound question. What happens to information when it enters a black hole? Hawking explained, "Initially, I thought information was destroyed, but this violates quantum laws. I later revised my position. Information is preserved, but transformed." This scientific journey had unexpected philosophical implications. Hawking proposed that human consciousness might present a similar paradox. From a purely physical perspective, the complex information pattern we call self seems to dissipate at death. Yet if information cannot be destroyed in the universe, as quantum theory suggests, what happens to the information encoded in our consciousness? This wasn't merely theoretical speculation for Hawking. Having faced death numerous times during health crises, he'd contemplated his own mortality deeply. The question becomes, is consciousness merely an emergent property of brain activity that terminates at death, or does the information pattern somehow persist in a transformed state? Hawking emphasized he wasn't proposing traditional religious afterlife concepts. "I'm not suggesting consciousness transfers to another realm. Rather, I'm pointing to fundamental questions about information, quantum states, and consciousness that remain unresolved in physics." He noted how quantum information theory suggests information might be preserved in ways we don't yet understand. The physicist then made a surprising connection to panpsychism, the philosophical view that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe rather than merely an emergent phenomenon of complex brains. While I remain skeptical of many specific claims, the question of whether consciousness is fundamental rather than emergent deserves serious scientific consideration. Hawking concluded this remarkable segment by acknowledging the limitations of current science. Perhaps consciousness relates to reality in ways our current physics cannot describe. Just as Newtonian physics couldn't explain quantum phenomena, our current frameworks may be inadequate for understanding consciousness. What we call death may be less final than we imagine from our limited perspective. In this profound chapter, Hawking examined how cutting-edge theoretical physics challenges our conventional understanding of reality and death. Many people don't realize how radically modern physics has transformed our understanding of reality, Hawking began. Concepts like time, space, and matter, which seem obvious in daily life, break down at fundamental levels. He explained how quantum field theory suggests particles are excitations in underlying fields rather than discrete objects, challenging our intuitive understanding of what constitutes physical reality. Hawking then addressed the implications of various multiverse theories. If the many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct, reality consists of constantly branching universes where every possibility plays out. This raises profound questions about the nature of death and consciousness. In such a framework, consciousness might have quantum properties that connect to these branching realities in ways we don't yet comprehend. The physicist also discussed how loop quantum gravity and string theory, attempts to reconcile quantum mechanics with general relativity, suggest spacetime itself may be emergent rather than fundamental. If spacetime is not the foundation of reality but emerges from deeper quantum processes, our entire framework for understanding existence requires revision. Most intriguingly, Hawking addressed recent theoretical work on quantum information and holographic principles. The holographic principle suggests all information in a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary. Similarly, perhaps what we experience as consciousness exists as information encoded differently than we currently understand. Hawking emphasized he wasn't making definitive claims but exploring theoretical possibilities. Throughout history, physics has repeatedly shown reality is not what it seems. From Earth being the center of the universe to matter being solid, our intuitions have been wrong before. Perhaps our intuitions about consciousness and death are similarly limited. He concluded with remarkable humility for someone of his stature. The most profound, Scientific minds, from Einstein to Bohr to Feynman, all acknowledged the deep mysteries that remain. The question of what happens to consciousness after death may require scientific frameworks we haven't yet developed. True scientific thinking means remaining open to possibilities beyond our current understanding. As the conversation entered its final stages, Hawking reflected on legacy, memory, and what truly constitutes survival beyond physical death in ways that revealed his deeply thoughtful approach to mortality. People often ask if I'm afraid of death, Hawking shared. What I fear is not death itself, but not fully using the time I've been given. This perspective had evolved throughout his remarkable life, from receiving a 2-year prognosis at 21 to living decades beyond medical expectations, each day representing borrowed time that shaped his approach to legacy. Hawking discussed how his perspective on immortality had transformed over his lifetime. In my younger years, I sought immortality through scientific discovery, equations and theories that would outlive me. As I've aged, I've come to see that our continuation takes multiple forms. He explained how humans achieve a form of afterlife through biological continuation in children, cultural continuation through ideas, and social continuation through the impact we have on others. Whether consciousness continues in some form after death remains an open question, he noted. But certain aspects of our existence undeniably continue: the ripples of our actions, the persistence of our ideas, and the memories others hold of us. Hawking described this as distributed existence, the way a person's influence extends beyond their physical presence. Most touchingly, Hawking reflected on how his increased dependence on others throughout his illness taught him that humans exist not as isolated individuals but as nodes in a network of relationships. In a very real sense, we continue existing in others, in their memories, behaviors we've influenced, and ideas we've shared. This isn't metaphorical. It's a different understanding of what constitutes existence. When asked directly about his personal hopes regarding an afterlife, Hawking surprised the interviewer with his response: "I approach death with curiosity rather than fear. If consciousness ends completely, I won't know it. If some aspect continues, whether in ways described by religions or in ways we haven't yet comprehended scientifically, that would be fascinating. Either possibility is acceptable to me." This philosophical openness revealed a man who, despite his public identity as a scientific materialist, had developed a nuanced and contemplative approach to life's ultimate transition. In the interview's conclusion, Hawking offered what might be considered his final thoughts on the great mystery of what awaits us all, insights that reveal the full complexity of his thinking on consciousness, death, and what might lie beyond. "Throughout my life, I've sought unification, attempting to reconcile quantum mechanics with general relativity in a theory of everything," Hawking reflected. Yet perhaps the ultimate unification isn't just between physical forces, but between our scientific understanding of the universe and our subjective experience of consciousness. This perspective suggested Hawking saw consciousness as a frontier as significant as the physics problems that defined his career. Hawking then made a statement that genuinely surprised those who knew him only through public appearances. "While I've often been portrayed as completely dismissing the possibility of existence beyond physical life, my actual position is more nuanced. The honest scientific position isn't absolute certainty that consciousness ends with brain function, but recognition that we're still profoundly limited in our understanding of both consciousness and the fundamental nature of reality." He elaborated on how physics itself has become increasingly abstract, moving away from purely materialist frameworks. Modern physics describes reality in terms of information, fields, and probability waves rather than concrete particles. As our understanding advances, the distinction between physical and mental, between matter and information, becomes increasingly blurred. When asked directly what he hoped might await after death, Hawking offered a response that combines scientific caution with philosophical openness. "I don't expect to meet God or enter heaven as traditionally conceived, but I remain curious about the ultimate nature of reality and consciousness. If consciousness is fundamentally connected to the universe in ways our current science doesn't comprehend, death may be less final than we assume." His final words on the subject revealed an intellectual humility often overshadowed by his public certainty on other topics. "The universe has repeatedly proven stranger than we imagined, from quantum entanglement to the behavior of black holes. It would be the height of scientific arrogance to claim we've resolved all possibilities regarding consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. Hawking concluded with characteristic wit, "Whatever awaits, I've had extraordinary borrowed time to contemplate these questions. If there is some form of continuation, I look forward to finally having the answers to the questions that have driven my life's work."